was the middle of summer, and I decided to go for a late-night walk to clear my head after a tough day at work. I lived in a suburban area that was just outside of the city, but basically in the middle of the woods. We had a ton of small hiking trails in the woods between the streets and the houses, but I always steered clear of them at night, just for safety purposes. And that night I was reminded why. I made my way down the street from my house and turned onto the next block, before realizing that I brought my bad headphones and the music I was playing in one ear was all crackly. I decided to turn off my music and just enjoy the quiet sound of nature around me. Only it wasn't quiet for long. My skin started to crawl, when out of nowhere, coming from the direction of the woods, I heard an indistinguishable screeching noise. It was almost like someone or something was shrieking out in pain. At first, there was only one cry, and I quickly convinced myself that it was just an animal noise and probably nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I was shaken up enough to not want to go on a walk anymore and promptly turned back toward my house. After a few steps, though, I heard it again. It was like a high-pitched, guttural scream, and I couldn't help but think that someone was in trouble. I called out toward the woods to see if anyone was there and if they needed help, but I didn't get an answer. I waited for a minute, but there was only silence. I turned and started walking toward my house again, and just as I started walking away from the woods, I heard it again. Only this time it was much closer, and it was repeating over and over. The sound pierced my ears and forced me to cover them with both of my hands as I looked around to see what was making such a terrifying noise, but it was too dark. I couldn't see anything. At least, not at first. Just as I was about to give up looking, my eyes caught a small shimmer from about 10 feet up a tree. I focused my attention there, and although I couldn't tell what it was, I could clearly see two reflective eyes looking down at me. The screeching stopped for a second as I locked eyes with the creature, but before I could get a better look at what it was, I heard another scream, a different one, and this time it came from a bit deeper in the woods. I looked away from the tree I was staring at for a second, and by the time I looked back, whatever it was had vanished. The other shrieking noise continued, and eventually I gave up on looking for the source and just decided to keep walking home. But I swear, no matter how much farther I got from that section of the woods, the screaming never got quieter. I tried to look up any possible sources when I got home, but I couldn't find anything. The closest thing I could find was a screeching owl, but from the videos I've seen, that noise isn't quite the same. I asked my neighbors if they have ever experienced that sound before, and even though none of them had, one of my neighbors said that their dog was taken by something out of his backyard, and they found its collar near one of the trails in those woods a few weeks later. So whatever it was clearly a predator, and I'm just happy I made it back home safely that night. I had been living in Florida for 3 years, but this was the first one after splitting up with my high school boyfriend. After a while, I reluctantly agreed to meet someone that my friend Chelsea had been telling me about. And after she gave me his number, the two of us really seemed to hit it off. So much so that I agreed to meet him at the beach near my house so we could go for a walk and hang out one night. That turned out to be a huge mistake on my part. It was a little after 9 that night when I pulled up to the beach in my Jeep, and after texting Mark, the guy I was supposed to meet, I started walking toward the lifeguard tower we planned to meet at. I was almost at the tower when I felt my phone vibrate. It was a text from Mark that said he was coming up from the other side of the beach and that I should meet him in the middle. I didn't even think about it before I started walking. I was just excited to finally meet him. I told him I was on my way, but as soon as I hit send, I noticed that my message wasn't going through. I hoped it wasn't a big deal and kept walking. I turned my head to the right so I could check out the water and the stars hanging over it, but what really caught my attention was the person walking on the beach behind me. I tried to act casual as I looked over my shoulder, but I wanted to see if it was someone walking with like a dog or something. Anything that would give them a reason to be that would suggest anything other than that they were following me. There was nothing though. Still, I couldn't be sure that I was being followed, so I just tried to stay calm as I texted Mark that I was walking and to see where exactly he was because I couldn't see him yet. I looked up from my phone and then back over my shoulder to see if that person was still behind me, and they were. Only now it looked like they were a little closer than last time. I picked up my walking pace a little bit, but tried not to make it look like I was running as I kept moving forward, hoping to put distance between me and the person behind me. It could have just been a coincidence that they were walking on the beach at the same time as me, but something in my stomach told me to keep moving. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest as I walked down the beach in the dark, with no noise other than the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. That was when I saw someone walking in front of me, as if they were coming towards me. Was it Mark? I thought to myself as I looked down at my phone to see if I missed a message from him. There was nothing though. And by the time I looked up from the phone, I could see the person in front of me a lot clearer. And judging by the mask that he was wearing over his face, I could tell that it wasn't Mark. His head tilted as I let out a loud scream. He started running toward me, and as I turned to run away, I could see the person who was following me was wearing a similar mask. I knew I couldn't run in that direction either, so I took off running away from the waterline and toward the street. There wasn't a parking lot in that direction, but I knew that there were a lot of cars on that street at night, so I figured it was the safest place for me. Every few steps that I ran, I looked over my shoulder and could see the two men chasing after me. Thankfully, the sand was slowing them down a bit as they tried to run. I made it to the edge of the beach, climbed over the small barrier that separated it from the road, and began flagging down the driver that was closest to me. Thankfully, they slowed down and let me get into their car. They drove me back to the parking lot where my car was and waited with me for the police. After I was done giving them my statement, I called Chelsea and asked her what the hell just happened. And she told me that she gave me the wrong Mark's number. The guy I was texting was apparently someone she met on Tinder a while back, and she stopped talking to him because he was getting really creepy. I don't care how much of an accident this was though, I'll never go on a blind date or anything like that again. It was 11:15 at night. I just finished up my shift at work, and because my car was in the shop, I had to walk home. I thought that it wouldn't be that big of a deal because I only worked about 5 minutes from my house on foot. And as long as I didn't mind cutting through the park behind my house, that trip would be even shorter. I left the store and started walking home and was surprised at how peaceful it actually was. I made it from the store to the park near my house in what seemed like no time at all. And because I had my phone flashlight on, I had no need to feel freaked out. At least, not until I got into the park. As soon as I walked through the entrance and made my way past the swing set, I noticed someone sitting on one of the benches near the park restrooms. I was admittedly already a little scared of them, just because it was a stranger in the middle of the night and I had to walk right by them to get to my house. I was even more on edge. That's why when they called out to me, I couldn't help but jump a little bit. I tried to hide it, but the stranger noticed and immediately tried to calm me down. "My bad, I didn't mean to scare you, man. I was just hoping you might have a cigarette." I took in a breath to relax a bit and then answered him honestly. I told him I didn't smoke, and I was sorry I couldn't help him out, and I thought that was the end of it. I started walking away from the man and told him to have a good night, but that's not what he had in mind. From behind me, I could hear the man scoff to himself, and then quietly he said, "The hell?" I heard movement behind me, so I knew that the man wasn't sitting on the bench anymore, and as much as I hoped that he was walking the other way, he was unmistakably trying to follow me. He called out to me again, "Hey, wait up! Where do you think you're going?" I started walking a bit faster, and by that point I could see my house across the street from the other side of the park. The sound of the man walking behind me got faster, and I could tell that he was catching up as he yelled again, "You've got to have something for me, kid!" I couldn't contain my fear anymore, and that was when I took off running. There was a small stretch of field at the end of the park that I had to run through before hopping over the gated fence and crossing the street to my house. With each step that I took, I felt like I could hear the stranger taking the same, and even though I didn't look behind me, I knew that if I slowed down even a little bit, he would have caught me. I made it safely into my house before slamming the door and locking it behind me. I still lived at home with my mom, but she was working late as well and hadn't gotten home yet, so I knew that I was alone. I paced back and forth in the doorway as I tried to figure out what to do next. I didn't know if the man was still out there, and even if he was, I wasn't sure what I could do. After taking a second to calm down, I decided to walk over to the window, and looked through the curtains to see if the man had followed me out of the park or not. I immediately took a step back from the window when I saw that he was standing right in the middle of my driveway, facing my front door. I started shaking. I eventually decided that the only thing I could do to keep myself safe was to call the police. I told them that a man had chased me from the park and now was standing right outside of my house, and they got there as fast as they could. As they were pulling up the road, though, the man must have seen them because he took off running through the park. As far as I know, he didn't get caught. My mom got home a few minutes after the police arrived, and we explained what happened. We ended up getting new locks on the doors and windows just to feel safer, and that was the last time I walked home from work by myself. Thankfully, my car was ready for me the next day.